What if the universe is actually rigged for life? What changes about our perception of the universe and how we live our lives as people on the planet? Depending on our answer to this question, it'll change a lot of things, including our worldview, how we see the world around us. Scientists have been arguing about this for centuries and centuries, far longer than either you or I have been alive. So I'm not going to pretend to have the end-all be-all of arguments, but I have found compelling evidence for the fine-tuning argument and what it stands for. The fine-tuning argument is actually one of the strongest cases for a designer apart from the design of creation. A lot of people will call this designer God. This argument is going to be outlined in 3 different premises and then 1 conclusion. The first premise we have is the universe contains evidence that it is finely tuned. What this statement is essentially saying is there exists evidence in the universe to explain that there is a miracle of life in the universe. So essentially, there is a lot of small detailed things that would appear to be finely tuned in the universe. So we have 2 really big pieces of evidence to support this part of the premise. We have, first up is the constants in nature, and second up we have biology. And so first up, we're going to look at the constants of nature. So for constants in nature, we have a ton of different constants that seem to be perfectly dialed for the creation of life in the universe. One quick side note though, people much smarter than me, doctors and scientists, will say that a number of 10 to the power of 50, anything smaller than that, 10 to the power of 50, is going to be an impossible statistic or a 0 probability. So first we've got gravity. Okay, so if gravity, or G, was weaker by 1 part in 10 to the 37th, we would not even have stars or the Earth form in the first place. And if it were a little bit stronger, it would cause these stars to combust and would cause planets to not be able to be created in the first place whatsoever. Just so that we can put this in perspective, I'm going to have a number come up on the screen to show you exactly how many zeros 1 part in 10 to the 37 actually is. Alright, the second constant is the rate of expansion that we see in the universe. As we know, the universe is expanding thanks to a lot of scientists before us, and we were able to track that through different equations that Einstein created, which were super duper cool. But the rate of expansion, if it were off by 1 part in 10 to the 120, we would either have a collapsed universe if it were stronger, or if it were weaker, we would actually expand too fast for any more galaxies to form. And here's just kind of how big 1 part in 10 to the 120 is. The third condition we have is the usable energy that we have in the universe. If this were off by 1 part in 10 to the 10,000, the universe would either cease to exist or spontaneously be creating black holes everywhere and we would all die. And so 10 in 10,000 is insane. That number is huge. I don't know if I can get that many zeros on the screen, but I can sure try. And these are just a few of the initial conditions that make up all of the initial conditions in order for us as people to exist. Overall, it was statistically figured out that it would take 10 to the 10 to the 123rd power in order for all of these things to work out well. That is the chance, 1 part in 10 to the 10 to the 123. Remember, the statistic of impossibility is about 10 to the power of 50. And this is far, far more than that. And actually, I would go on to try to explain exactly how big that number is by saying that the number of atoms in the entire universe go up to 10 to the power of 80. And this is 10 to the 10 to the 123rd power. That means there's actually a smaller chance of us existing than there are atoms in the universe, or grains of sand in every beach on every planet. Surprisingly enough, biology actually gives us a lot of different numbers and concepts that refer towards the evidence for fine-tuning that support that very well. First up actually is going to be the complexity of the cell. So I'm not a scientist, but I've done some research as to the complexity of the cell and other people who have studied it. And so biologist Michael Denton describes the cell in a wonderful metaphor. He uses the metaphor of a city, of New York City to be exact. And he tells us to imagine this cell as like an airship hovering over New York City and having portals opening and closing in all aspects of it to let in different traffics and to regulate different things. And in the same way, he says that the cell regulates different things on the surface of itself to allow nutrients to enter and exit. And then he goes in talking about all these wonderful things a cell can actually do and the different statistics behind that. Something crazy about the cell is each part works simultaneously with the other part, and they can work together and continue to create life in an amazing way that's really shocking to me. I'm very interested in it. But he goes on and he says, due to the complexity of proteins and amino acids that are created inside of the cell, it is estimated that the existence of a protein by chance is 1 in 10 to the 300. 1 in 10 to the 300, which is much, much smaller than that statistic of impossible probability or zero probability that we were talking about earlier, which means that the chance of a protein in itself being created is smaller than the atoms of the universe, and it is happening over and over and over and over and over in all of our bodies hundreds of thousands of times a second. Another thing is DNA itself is actually a humongous indicator for life and design in the universe. We can see that we are made by millions and millions of different components. The ATCG that you learn in science in high school and middle school, that all applies here, and it's like computer code, but way more complex than we could ever imagine computer code could be. And we are all created differently and specifically in different aspects of each of our builds, each of our lives, and it's really amazing. And in every cell, there's actually 6 feet worth of length in DNA, which I think is absolutely insane and wondrous. So biology and physics were our evidence for premise 1. Now let's move on to premise 2, which is the fine-tuning is due to chance, necessity, or design. There are generally 3 different ways people view the creation of the universe. That's going to be either chance, necessity, or it'll be by design. Usually chance and necessity are held by people who are more naturalistic or more atheistic in nature, while the third one usually points to some version of theism or believing that there is a God. People who believe it was by chance usually say that the universe was created by a stroke of luck, that everything was dialed in at the perfect way at the perfect time, just happening to create the perfect universe. Those who believe in necessity believe that the laws of logic created before the Big Bang were necessary and therefore created an inevitable universe where we now exist in today. And those who believe it was designed believe that we were created specifically by a designer, aka God. Now that we've established the 3 different ways that people believe the universe was created, we can now dive into the third premise, which is design is the most plausible explanation for the universe. Clearly, by all 3 of these views, the creation of the universe is considered a miracle. But the question is, how did this miracle come about? What makes the most sense? And there's a great metaphor that I think outlines this very well. Imagine we have a painting on the floor next to some paint buckets in an alleyway, and 3 men walk up and they see this painting with the paint buckets next to it. The person who believes the universe was caused by chance would say, wow, look at this amazing painting. This is so beautiful. These paint cans must have fallen onto the paint canvas in order to create this beautiful design we see today. The second person who believes in necessity would have said the laws of logic and physics must have created this beautiful painting. And then the third man says, wow, this is a beautiful painting. Somebody must have used a paintbrush and painted this beautiful thing with all of these different paint buckets. Now, it personally seems to me in this metaphor that the first 2 men, those by chance and necessity, tend to look at the things that were already created. That paint had to come from somewhere. The laws of logic and physics had to come from somewhere. The laws of thermodynamics and all of those things had to come from somewhere. For chance, I personally don't believe it's reliable to believe in a 10 to the 10 to the 123 when we cut things off at impossible at 10 to the power of 50. And so it seems to me it is most logical to believe that there was something or someone that designed the universe in order for us to exist in it. And this is the fine-tuning argument, saying it is the most plausible thing to believe in a designer rather than just the design.